Hi everyone. Today we're talking about actuaries in social policy. How can actuaries contribute to social policy through research? How are actuaries investigating societal trends like the increasing rates in autism in children? And how are actuaries using this research and data for good to help shape appropriate policy responses? Joining us for this discussion is Maathu Ranjan, an experienced actuary who's currently completing her PhD to investigate the increasing rates of autism, amongst other things, and the impact that this is having on government support services. I've been so inspired by Mathu's career path, which includes roles across disability, health, and general insurance. That's non-life insurance for our global actuaries. She's led actuarial teams at the NDIA. She's an award-winning researcher with an impressive research agenda in the social services space. So I've invited her on the show today to share some of her research findings and also to talk to us a bit about how she's carved out such an impressive and impactful career. Maathu, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
Now, Maathu, we're both old girls from North Sydney Girls High School.
Adult Yora.
Adult Autiora. And we're also both passionate about the social services space. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. And Maathu, at the time of recording, it's just been announced this week that you will be the 2027 president of the Actuaries Institute. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Julia. There's nothing as humbling as, coming home from being elected and having your children tell you that you can't make a Vegemite and cheese sandwich correctly. Um, but I'm absolutely honored and thrilled and a little bit dazed to be stewarding our wonderful profession and the legacy that the giants who've paved the way before us have made through this time of disruption, the age of AI. The success of the Institute strategy, that's a matter of professional survival for me and for all younger actuaries who still have half a career ahead of us. Those of us for whom climate change, the AI world, housing affordability, social policy, and the stability of international relations, they all have real world implications for the way we work and the way we live. So, what more of an incentive to ensure that we have a broader, more influential profession that engages and uplifts its youth?
That's so inspiring, Maathu, and a broader and a broader profession and the application that actuaries have on society. It's not just limited to life insurance or to insurance anymore. There is so much that we're doing across so many different industries. And I think it's really exciting, as you said, for the survival of the profession that we need to be embracing that. And to have a leader like yourself who has carved a career path along those lines, I think that's super exciting that we'll have you at the helm in a couple of years' time.
Thanks, Julia. I'm counting on the support of many in our august profession. So I'm looking forward to it as well and excited.
Well, you have my support, Mathu, and I can see that you have the support of many across the profession. So, yeah, very much looking forward to that. So, before we get into today's discussion about actuaries in social policy, I'm keen to hear, Mathu, how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
That's such a nice way to put it, the actuarial superpower. I think I use mine to make sense of the information around me. And that is, it could be data, big or small. It could be anecdotal evidence that speaks to the policy context or the commercial context, the business question. I then use them to create an evidence body, through rigorous methods, benchmarking exercises, and ways to sort of understand what that information is saying. That can then be used to guide good decision making and policy design. And for me, good decisions and good policy can make all the difference in the world.
Such a great superpower because that's impacting and benefiting our whole society, isn't it? You've got so much opportunity to create so much benefit when that's the way that you're applying your superpowers.
We do, and it just highlights that the actuarial skill set that we're taught at university, it can be applied in any area really,
Mm,
and with the view that we're doing it for the good of the benefit of the public.
mm. It's fantastic. I love that. So now you're currently on leave from your role at the NDIA. where you're leading actuaries to use data for good. But you've been awarded the Sir Roland Wilson Scholarship to complete your PhD full time. Congratulations on that. That's a huge, huge achievement. So I will ask you a little bit more about your research findings later, but how did you get into research in the first place? Not all actuaries do this. How did you do that, Madhu?
Well, thanks, Julie. That's a good question. And I think I've always been interested in the research process,
Uh-huh.
but I really got hooked into it in my second year of university when I went on exchange to the University of Michigan. And when you're in America, the courses that you do aren't directly actuarial. You either have to do economics and maths courses to then map it to our actuarial courses over here.
Mhm.
One of my economics courses, I had a dragon of a professor, but he was very well connected. And what it meant was that if you did really well in that final assessment, which was a major project, you'd be awarded an internship to go work at the US Reserve Bank.
Wow.
And like many of us, we're quite driven, and so if someone dangles something, you're like, right, what do I need to do? But I essentially got hooked into finding a business question or a policy question, looking at what data was available that I could use, applying the techniques that I was taught. In that case, it was the regression methodologies and others in microeconomic econometrics courses.
Mhm.
And then it was to then use those findings and the results to say, what are the conclusions and implications for policy? So that was the hook. I didn't take up the opportunity to go work at the US Reserve Bank. The GFC had tanked the Aussie dollar, which meant that I really had to come home. But I'd also had a placement lined up for an actuarial firm in Australia for as part of the UNSW co-op program. So it was a good thing in the end. Um, but that hook meant that I did honours at UNSW with the supervision of Michael Sherris and Katja Honeywell. And there we looked at solutions for longevity risk and the impact that international solvency regimes could have on the pricing of annuity products. I started my professional career in consulting and then in government. And again, a lot of what we did was using data that was available or lack thereof, and then answering commercial or policy questions that were of interest to decision makers.
Hmm.
So that was really my pathway into evidence-based decision and policy making.
Wow. So really it was about finding a question and using the skills that you've been taught as an actuary or even those broader analytical skills, data analytical skills, to be able to answer that question.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah. And then a little bit of a mix of opportunity and GFC and other things kind of shaping the way that it went. And great paper that you wrote as well that you've just mentioned there. We'll link that to in the show notes. Um, yeah, fascinating. So, okay, so you started out with that. How is research still kind of part of what you're doing today, though?
Thanks, Julia. So the underlying motivation for my PhD research at the moment was that I wanted to do something that was of practical relevance to where I worked.
Mhm.
And I'd been working at the NGIA for a few years at that point. And one of the most significant sort of risks to the sustainability of the scheme that had come up year and year was the increasing numbers of children that were approaching the scheme and accessing the scheme for supports. And it wasn't quite expected that this level or a number of children would be approaching the scheme based on the original costings, which used the Survey of Disability, Ageing and Carers data to predict what the level of prevalence of various disabilities would be in
Mm.
Australia over the years to come. So, finding out why there was such an increase, particularly in the rates of autism amongst children, was paramount to then shaping the appropriate policy responses um, to the challenge. I had such amazing champions at the NGIA, from Sarah Johnson to Peter Hardy, David Gifford, Sally Galbraith, and I could go on,
Yeah.
as well as the example of John Walsh,
Mm.
that then enabled me to go and pursue this research full time at the Australian National University through the Sir Roland Wilson program, which is a scholarship that provides an opportunity for public servants and leaders in the Australian public service to go and study a topic of national significance to the
Mm.
Australian government.
Mm. Wow, congratulations. I mean, this is a topic of national significance because the NDIS is arguably one of the biggest reforms to healthcare that we've ever had. I mean, it's such a fantastic service to be able to provide support to those families that need it. And I guess though when it's been set up under some assumptions based on, historic prevalence and then those rates change, that's a huge societal issue, but it's also a funding issue too. There's so many aspects and dimensions to that. So, how exciting that your research has been able to, or is going to be able to, not just research something that you're interested in, but also research the findings of that research are going to be able to really make a difference to whether or not we can continue, well, hopefully that we can continue and find different ways to continue to support people that need it.
That's exactly right, Julia. And being able to do something that I'm passionate and interested in, but also in something that will shape the lives of people to be able to contribute back to society.
Yeah.
That was the key motivation for continuing that research journey.
Mm. And what a great opportunity that you have to be able to pursue that full time under this scholarship.
Absolutely. I mean, we're still got to pay the mortgage, right? So
This is true. This is true. Okay, so through this PhD research that you're doing, such important work, I wonder if you could summarize your research findings for us so far.
estimates of autism prevalence in Australia are some of the greatest in the world, and they're also increasing faster than other countries who have similar health profiles and economies, like the US, the UK, Canada, and so on. Worldwide median estimates of autism prevalence have almost doubled over the last decade.
Doubled.
But in Australia, estimates have grown at a much faster rate. In 2009, it was estimated that 1 in 330 people would have autism. The latest estimate, which was aired on The Assembly by the ABC, was that 1 in 40 people have autism.
Wow.
So you can see that there's been a significant increase in the recognition of autism and neurodiversity in general within our population. Now, there are a number of reasons for this, and they include changing diagnostic criteria, increasing awareness in society, possible genetic and environmental factors changing, like the increasing age of parents who have when they have their first child, as well as the need for a diagnosis to access funded support. And our public policy landscape, well, that's the factor that's unique to the Australian context that could explain a portion of the growth that is so much greater than the global average. So what we do in our research is to use nifty econometrics techniques, so panel data, and we leverage the natural experiment around the staggered rollout of the NDIS to various regions in Australia. And what we find is that the behavioural response in the number of people seeking a diagnosis to access supports, that accounts for 47%, or almost half of the diagnoses since 2012.
Wow. So, Maathu, it sounds like we've kind of got this self-fulfilling prophecy where people are maybe seeking a diagnosis who wouldn't have otherwise been looking for that in order to access some sort of support or funding. Is that what's happening?
So we need to go back to the way the system of supports works in Australia to be able to answer that question. The system of supports for people with disability has shifted. It used to be state funded, block funded to providers. There wasn't enough of it around, and not everyone was getting the support they needed. The NDIS model shifts that and creates an individualized model where individuals can access support and have the choice and control around who gives them and who provides that support to them. What we've also seen is that with the introduction of the NDIS is this oasis in the desert concept, where there isn't much other support in the mainstream services, which was the original intention for the scheme to provide supports to those with the most substantial needs, and then all people with disability being able to access supports within the mainstream system. So our finding here is showing that shift in the way disability supports are provided, that entire system has created the need for people to go and get a diagnosis to access any kind of support that they need.
So the whole system's changed really. And we're not saying people are just going and doctors are giving out diagnoses so families can get extra money. That's not what's happening. There's a whole shift in the way the way services are provided and what's required to access those services. So this increase in prevalence then, this increase in rates, I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That very much depends on the perspective that we're looking at it from. So some might say, or some might argue, that diagnosing neurodiversity and autism in particular was possibly always present in the underlying population. And what this policy has done is it's shed light on the actual diversity of neural abilities that are present in our population.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a step towards the social model of disability, where we can minimize the barriers that individuals are facing in being able to participate in their society and in the community around them by recognizing their disabilities. Others might then argue that increased rates of diagnoses, because of the way the system is set up, are actually a result of overdiagnosis of disabilities that relate to mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions, and that the lack of supports and infrastructure in the mainstream services around us, so not the social model, have led to more reaching out to then being able to access any kind of support. So, is it a good thing or bad thing? It depends on the perspective.
Sounds like there's lots going on. There's a lot of different factors. This is not a simple issue or one that has a simple cause. There's a lot of different things that are going on behind the scenes. I mean, what's your take on it? What's your stand?
Where do I stand?
Yeah.
I think that actuaries and the public service have an important role in bringing an objective, impartial evidence to the conversation. And as I said earlier, we use our superpowers to help decision making and help policy design around important issues that impact the lives of so many people. But by bringing objective and impartial evidence, particularly in an area where data has been so scarce and anecdotal evidence has played a strong role, that's important to complement the anecdotal evidence, which inherently includes the biases of the individuals who are providing it.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of data, in using data for good, I mean, how do you think Australia's data landscape has changed?
I'm going to tell you a story about that one, actually. So a couple of summits ago, which is the All Actuaries conference that we hold, the Institute invited younger actuaries to come and present a radical idea. It didn't have to be plausible, it just had to be something new and something radical. So a few of us at the NGIA, we thought we'd put in a presentation about something that has been frustrating us to no ends, and it's data quality and data availability and linked administrative data in general. So our data was that we should have an interconnected, interlinked system from both state and federal government departments, a data system that's linked, an interlinked data system from both state and federal government departments, where we can then measure the life outcomes, so health, financial, education, employment, as well as, the access to support. So the whole sort of tax and transfer system that we have in Australia over the course of an individual's lifetime. So from birth to death. Now, that might seem like a lot of information, and the brief, as I said, it was to be radical, not necessarily plausible. But yeah, but that was our idea. Now, we were told to present this in a radical way. And Naomi, who was one of our former presidents, suggested, you young actuaries, you can do it in interpretive dance, but being a little bit on the older side of the younger actuaries, the only real concession we gave to that was to include a bunch of memes, which meant that we did win People's Choice Award. I'd probably have to give most of that credit to Duncan, my co-presenter, Duncan Clark, who had a very smooth Scottish accent. But that idea isn't actually as far-fetched from today's administrative data landscape. We now have the Australian Bureau of Statistics PLIDA dataset, which is a person-level integrated data asset, and it combines administrative records across the big federal government departments, so the ATO, Medicare, the social services, the NDIS data is in there as well. So there's a whole data set there which can be used for research purposes and for policy design purposes. They've also got the BLADE data set, which is the longitudinal data of businesses in Australia and commercial activity as well. And we also have the upcoming NDDA, or the National Disability Data Asset, which combines what were typically state-provided services like disability services and health services with the federal government data as well. My understanding is that that's a little bit further away from what it was originally intended to be, but it's still a good source of information that connects state-based services with federal government services. And having good quality administrative data and government data, well, that's been key to the robust evaluations of policy, of economic outcomes, and the underlying modelling for major government outputs. The key examples being the annual budget and the intergenerational report. Internationally, I think the Australian government's commitment to collecting, sharing, and making administrative data available for research and for policy is actually quite advanced compared with our counterparts in the UK and the US. But countries like Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, they have really rich administrative data sets. So they're probably a step ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. And I think that comes back to what you were saying before, Maathu, about the fragmented systems that we have. You know, we've got state services, we've got federal funding, we've got all these services all over the place. And so it's a really complex landscape to be able to put it together and get a person-centric view. And like you, I've spent most of my career as an actuary in social services and putting together all of those different building blocks of data to try and draw those insights. Once you can do it, it's fantastic. It really makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on, what the drivers are, and what the impacts could be. But until we have that, it's very difficult when there's bits and pieces all over the place.
That's exactly right. And we're obviously living in a system of interconnected services. And, it would be like the flow-on effects or the indirect consequences of some of the policy actions that we take, or some sort of, does funding here impact life outcomes over here? That's the power that this sort of data would be able to give us. Now, it does come with some challenges. One of the things that sort of made it implausible to us was the privacy concerns around individuals' data. And there are huge hurdles that face us in terms of being able to access this data, the bureaucracy around access, the approvals, the clearances, the legal discussions, the permissions. But that's all really important in being able to protect the privacy of the individuals whose data is being collected. And in the case of this sort of admin data, it'd be almost all Australians. There's also the challenges of whether the data that's in there is being used appropriately, because it is administrative data. It's being used to collect and access government services. So how do you measure outcomes using that data? What is a good measure of an outcome? And are you actually measuring the right thing? Are you interpreting the data in a way that it was meant to be when it was first collected? So those are still some challenges around being able to use it and to use it well. But I'm still very excited about the possibilities of it into the future.
Yeah. It's such an interesting connection between that administrative data, service usage, and then outcomes. Sometimes it can be easy if we apply a profit or a funding approach, we might think, oh, well, the less services people use, the better, the better outcomes, they mustn't need them. But really it can be the opposite sometimes, can't it? That people need to access more services in a certain area so that they can have better outcomes in another area. Mental health is a classic example. So, we think, well, if people are not using mental health services, their mental health must be good. Not necessarily true. People accessing mental health services might be, accessing what they need so that they can continue to work, they can continue to contribute, they can continue to stay well and, reduce whether it's cost to government or other cash flows. It's a very complex landscape, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And it's one where the data that we have from various different government departments connected together gives us the power to be able to explore some of that.
Yeah, fantastic. So, some amazing work that you are doing, Maathu. It's been really great to hear about your journey into research and what's driving your research now, and some of what's coming out of your research already. So, really exciting to watch this space and see how that work and that research can contribute to shaping the public policy going forward. So, Martha, I just want to finish with one question, and it's this. What's your top tip for actuaries wanting to contribute to social policy?
I've got three top tips. And I
Okay.
think the first one is to embrace who you are. And in our case, it's embrace your inner nerd. The high school that we went to, it celebrated the cerebral prowess of teenage girls. You know, you could win debating championships, and that was exciting. You could win swimming championships, but you could also win, public speaking championships. It was
Yep.
all very much about celebrating that inner nerd. I am a very proud founding member of the Affinity Lunchtime Cryptic Crossword Club. I'm not sure if it's still going, but that was exciting. And even to this day, we have a Senate estimate watch party at the
Oh.
NDIA, where over lunch or whenever it's on, we have the big screen up with where the senators grill our senior leadership, and it feels very much like a Swans game. There's oohs and ahs, and oh, he did that one well. Oh, he got a goal in there. So embrace your inner nerd. I think the second one is have integrity. A lot about working in social policy is that it impacts the lives of so many Australians and people in general. And so doing the right thing can mean that you can sleep at night. And working in such a controversial space, there are always going to be opinions and difference of opinions as well. So I strive to act in a way that means that I'm true to the values, not only of our profession, but also that of the Australian Public Service, that of integrity, acting ethically and in the public interest. And then finally, pay it forward. There are so many legends and giants and champions for whom I'm thankful for. They've not only paved the way ahead for my career, but they've actually actively championed me and given me opportunities to engage in wider industry. They've taken the time to provide honest feedback. They've also opened my eyes to the ways of the world and provided invaluable support when those times have called for it. So the best thing that I can do in return is to pay it forward and provide that leg up and that opportunity for the next person to mentor others, or at least those that actually want to be mentored, and to be an example and a role model.
And a role model you are, Mathu. Thank you so much for sharing your story and some of your thoughts on the topic of actuaries in social policy today. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julia. A pleasure to be here.